the last 10 or 20 years, especially when it comes to mental health discourse, I think that we've come a really long way when it comes to supporting those with certain mental illnesses, mental health conditions. So the World Health Organization released a statistic that said 90% of people living in underdeveloped countries will not receive the correct treatment for a given mental health condition they have. And through organisations like the WHO that support people living with mental health conditions, as well as more locally, you may have heard of MIND, which is a very prominent mental health charity, as well as CALM, or Campaign Against Living Miserably, have done incredible work in supporting those that have come forward and been diagnosed with a particular condition, whether that's anxiety, chronic depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, different personality disorders, or disorders of mood. And so often when I think about what I would like tomorrow to look like, or a week from now, a few months from now, even a few years from now, I'm hopeful that the support that young people get in schools, through their teachers, through pastoral teams, through their friends, family, loved ones, is going in the right direction to support them in a really meaningful way. And by no means do I think that having a mental health condition in this day and age should stop you from achieving what you want to achieve. However, one thing that I think we do need to work on as a society is how we actually talk about those people who have mental health conditions. And also thinking about what it looks like to change the narrative on how we talk about mental health discourse in general. And so I am going to spend this brief amount of time doing what I think is the most meaningful to share how I think we should reshape how we talk about mental health disorders. And so I want to share with you a personal story of mine to kind of break down the different barriers in access to talking about mental health conditions and who has a stake on talking about mental health conditions, but also I'm going to present 5 misconceptions that I think we need to break in order to make mental health condition access and just discourse far more readily available and far more supportive than it is today. And so my story starts roughly in October 2019. So this is me at 20 years old. I was a student at UCL doing philosophy and history of art, and I was having the absolute time of my life. I had just begun dating. I was chair of the philosophy society in the department. I was loving my course. I was making the most amazing friends. My lecturers were amazing. I was going to art galleries and museums and having all these amazing experiences that many of you will go on to have when you either embark on university or whatever future plan that you want to pursue. This photo, though, was also taken almost 2 months after I was diagnosed with a condition that essentially would make a lot of sense in terms of the experiences that I had as a child, but will also now shape the way that I am experiencing the world and perceived in the world from that date onwards. And so 2 months before this picture was taken, I was diagnosed with this condition. So some people may have heard of it. It's called borderline personality disorder, or BPD. There are some statistics on the board, but to summarize, essentially it's a mood disorder associated with emotional instability, impulsive behaviors, intense but unstable relationships. 5.9% of people in the world have a diagnosis with BPD, and it's classified as what people call as a severe mental illness. So it's one that significantly impairs day-to-day functioning. And so this is a condition that tends to be managed by medication, whether that's through antidepressants and antipsychotics, therapy, and psychiatric support. People that experience BPD to be diagnosed need to have 5 out of 9 systems on the DSM, which is the classifier of how we diagnose mental illnesses. Some of these include extreme mood swings, chronic emptiness, and psychosis, but are not limited to this. And essentially, every person experiencing a particular mental health condition, as you may know, has very different ways and different triggers that help it pervade in society and make things difficult for them. So what I don't want to focus on necessarily is how I came to be diagnosed with this condition per se, or sort of my journey into it, but some of the things I've experienced just generally when it comes to how people talk about people with BPD and mental disorders in general, and how we can propose maybe a changed narrative in how we talk about these things in the future. So this is the first misconception that I think often comes to the forefront when we're talking about mental health disorders. It's this: people with mental health conditions will struggle to keep up with the demands of working life, right? So in school, you may have an incredible pastoral support team, you may have access to school counsellors, but often when we talk about those experiencing mental health conditions in the workplace, there is still a lot of stigma associated with it. There's a lot of discourse around whether you think that the person in charge of, say, people, when they are shown to be sort of classified as emotionally unstable in some way, can lead particular lives in the workplace that would make them incredible at their jobs. But the misconception is almost to suggest that the workplace doesn't have a responsibility to those people. I don't think that my condition affects how good I am as a teacher or how much I care about my students. So the first change narrative that I would like to propose is that those with mental health conditions with employer support can thrive at work. So this is akin to, say, when I look at all of you today, you have your pastoral teams, you've got your form tutors, your head of houses. Children, even in the primary sector, have one form tutor for the entirety of their days. You've got people around you that care about you, that will help you. And so I think that this shouldn't change when you get into the workplace. A lot of conditions, unfortunately, stay with you for your life. And so what we need to do is really encourage employers to support those living with mental health conditions as best as they can, so that they can fully perform to the best of their abilities. Second misconception, which is quite a stark one, and not everyone will come out and say it, but I've certainly experienced some of these words and experienced people talking about other people in this way. Those suffering from mental illness are often crazy, unhinged, or insane in their approach to others. Now, I'm sure many of you can picture certain people in social media that have kind of perpetuated this idea. One famous example of a person with borderline personality disorder is Pete Davidson, the comedian, who most of you may have heard of. And he's been very open about some of the struggles that he's endured and the way that the narrative of the media has perpetuated this idea that, you know, he's crazy and unhinged or insane in some way. But essentially what we need to do is be really careful with the language we use. It's very easy to use these terms in jest and without thinking that there'll be any particular point of repercussions to it. But before you do that, always think who's on the other end of the receiving end, essentially, of what you're about to say. And so the change narrative too, I think, is how we even approach talking about those with mental illness. So this is a person living with mental illness who sometimes struggles to regulate their emotion, would be my proposed change narrative. Right? So on a day-to-day basis, I would like to think, especially those of you that are taught by me, do not necessarily pick out some of the symptoms that I've described. I'm incredibly succinct and organised, and teaching in a school, you've got to be incredibly patient. That doesn't mean that I'm not tested, but over time you can improve your ability to regulate your emotions and sort of, you know, operate in society in a really meaningful way, just as someone else. So when we talk about this conception of normal, what we're actually talking about is every individual just being unique and appreciating that. And so how we change our language can make a difference. This is the third misconception. The third misconception is there's a need for people to share their mental health conditions with others. It is obvious they are struggling. But as we've come to know, either through personal experience, because of yourself, or through your loved ones, your friends, your family, often it's the people that don't show their struggle that can be the ones suffering in silence. And I think over the years we've done an incredibly good job as a society of supporting those people that are struggling. But a lot of people won't show their struggle, right? A lot of people will keep things bottled in and they'll keep things to themselves. And so what I want to suggest actually is that sharing your mental health condition, which is the third change narrative, with others is the first step in overcoming the struggle itself. So what I mean by that is in sharing what you're going through, whether it's a really, really tough day, maybe something's happened at school or work that has made you spiral in some way, or maybe you're just having a particularly difficult period, like there's something going on in your life or something triggers a particular experience that you have. What I suggest that actually sharing that struggle doesn't need to be in as much detail or as little detail as you want, will make a difference in how people perceive you, and I think it makes people more empathetic as well. So I think people shouldn't worry as much about keeping things bottled in, but in order to dissipate that worry, we as a community need to make sure that they feel comfortable with sharing their thoughts in the first place. Right, so misconception 4, recovery from mental illness occurs when medication and therapy are no longer needed. Now, I want you all to picture some films or TV programs that you've watched where often you'll have the protagonist and they're in the bathroom and they appear panicked and they've got the sort of mirror right in front of them and the director does a really close-up shot of their distressed face and they open the cupboard and there's loads of pills everywhere. And they'll often zoom in, the director zooms in on whatever the medication says, antipsychotics or antidepressants. And it's to create a sense of the person involved in front of you struggling in some way. Now, what I want to suggest is that medication can actually just be a marker of someone doing as well as they can. So, different conditions will have different diagnoses and different ways in which they can sort of soften or completely go out after a period of time. For instance, some people with, we call it bouts of depression, may experience depression seasonally. So seasonal depression is a classification. So it could be that for the majority of the year, they don't experience certain feelings. Now with BPD, it's been diagnosed almost 6 years ago, I've come to the realization that medication and therapy are probably something that I need for life. It's not a diagnosis that I'll ever be able to shake off. But that doesn't particularly matter either, because I think we need to change the way we talk about the openness of people that take medication and kind of go to therapy as something that's just a very healthy and productive thing to do if it's right for the person. And so I say to that, the key character is that medication and therapy can be useful to manage mental health conditions for life if needed. I think there's a lot of stigma that's perpetuated around people that have to take medication or who should take it but be silent about the experiences that they're having. And when I think about what I want the future to look like, it would be amazing if it's just commonplace for people to declare, in the same way that essentially you would be aware that someone has a broken leg and they're in pain and they talk about the medication they're taking for it. We're able just to be open about mental health and break the stigmas around it. Now the fifth misconception, I think, is the most interesting one, because there's kind of two parts to it. So, fifth misconception, living with a mental health condition, though not a fault, is a weakness of sorts. And so this misconception comes from this notion that if you talk to someone with a mental health condition, a lot of the time you'll treat them with equal respect and it won't affect your interaction. However, there will be some people that don't blame people for having a particular condition, and yet at the same time they see it as a kind of deficiency or something missing as part of their character, right? That you've got a particular diagnosis and therefore you're weaker. Even if they don't see it, that's the perception you may have. And so I think this is the most intriguing change narrative, and one that I want to encourage especially young people to celebrate about themselves, whether they have a particular diagnosed condition or not. It's this, the very thing that makes you different, i.e. what I call a marker of your mental illness, can be a superpower. And so I was lucky enough a few years back to be invited by Mind, which is a mental health charity, to write about my experiences of living with BPD after I was diagnosed. And I focused in my project, in my sort of written piece, on what my superpowers are, what makes me me. I'm incredibly hyper-organised. I am able to get things done before the deadline. I'm very optimistic. I'm a very smiley and cheerful person. I'm very creative. I love painting. I love doing things to do with especially contemporary art. And it's a lot of these things that make me me. I like to think I'm a very empathetic person. I'm someone that you can talk to without judgment and share your feelings with, right? And so a lot of these things, when taken in extremes, are a marker of the mental illness that I have, and at the same time, they are also incredibly important in shaping who I am, and I think they are superpowers. And so, not to put it too fine of a point on it, but that's the biggest takeaway, right? When I look at how I want tomorrow to look like, or I want a couple of weeks to look like, a few months or a few years, I want people to celebrate what makes them different. It's easy to say it to someone, but to actually mean it and to actually value one another for the different experiences that people have. And so, as I start to conclude this little bit, I wanted to end with this quotation that I think sums up really well the points I'm trying to make about what we want our future to look like. And This is from Julian Seiter. So Julian Seiter is a professor at Harvard Medical School. He's a doctor. He's actually a kidney specialist, and he has written extensively on chronic illness. And so sometimes mental health conditions, I think, are like chronic illnesses, in that you can have some of them for life. And I really, really like this quotation that he writes. And so he says, "You are not your illness. You have an individual story to tell. You have a name, a history, a personality. Staying yourself is part of the battle." And so to all of you, I would love you to go away and think about, what is it that makes you individual? What are some of the things that maybe at first glance you think are markers of a particular thing that make you too different? Or too on the outside? What are the things that will make you to celebrate you and accepting yourself regardless of whatever markers of any condition that you have? And so think about that, and I implore you essentially to think about how you want your future to look like as well when it comes to mental health.